Hello friends, my name is Roisin and welcome back to my channel. It's time for another literary video essay, and since it's December I wanted to make something fairly festive. So I thought we could talk about the best book-to-screen adaptation of all time, The Muppets' Christmas Carol. I don't mean that this is the best adaptation of Dickens's A Christmas Carol, although there have been many and this is definitely the best one. And I don't mean that it's the best Christmas film either, although I do definitely think it's up there on that list as well. I think that this film is probably the best book-to-screen adaptation that I have ever seen. Adaptation is always a tricky subject, especially for very well-loved books. And the Muppets also bring with them their own fan base with their own expectations of what a Muppets film is. This film had a very fine line to walk, but I think we really have to credit the Jim Henson Company with their care and attention to detail for making a film that so brilliantly combines a Muppet movie with a Dickensian adaptation. I mean, for more information about the attention to detail, go and watch Abby Cox's video about the costumes, which I will leave linked in the cards above. So I want to start by saying I am not a film expert. I'm not really any kind of expert, but I'm certainly not a film expert. And so I'm not looking at this movie from a filmic perspective. I'm not talking about the merits of the production. I'm talking specifically about this film as an adaptation. And so in order to do that, I think we should have a wee chat about adaptation theory. It's not boring, I promise. So Linda Hutcheon says that adaptation is an extended, deliberate, announced revisitation of a particular work of art. It is both the product itself, in this case The Muppets' Christmas Carol, and the act of adaptation, which according to Hutcheon always involves reinterpretation and recreation. No adaptation can be an exact representation of the original work, because in this example the change of medium means that something has to change. In order to understand the film not just in its own right but as an adaptation, we have to think of it in relation to the novella and think of it as a plural stereophone of echoes, citations and references. Basically, the narrative perspective of the person doing the adapting, the time period in which it is being adapted, and the reasons for the adaptation are all important things for us to consider. We also need to consider the fact that an adaptation being good and an adaptation being faithful are not necessarily the same thing. Lisa Hutcheon talks about the loaded language that we use when we talk about film adaptation. Tampering, abusing, betrayal, defamation, perversion. It's all very puritanical and doesn't really allow for the ways in which an adaptation is a reading of the text and a different piece of art that, regardless of how faithful it seems to the audience, it is just one reading. For a long time, fidelity criticism, as it came to be known, was the critical orthodoxy in adaptation studies. Today that dominance has been challenged. It is now more common among adaptation critics to consider a work as a dialogue with the original, as a translation that allows us, in particular when dealing with a canonical work like Dickens, think about the larger ideas behind the adaptation, rather than focusing solely on how faithfully it has stuck to the plot. To be faithful to the original novel is to recognise all that has happened since. The simultaneous recognition of the novel's importance as literature and culture makes the Muppet version unique. The Muppets' Christmas Carol does have an advantage that lots of films do not when it comes to adaptation of the source material. A Christmas Carol is a novella. It is not only a very short work, but also a very simple one, and one whose plot is part of the cultural milieu. I mentioned earlier that there have been many adaptations, as many as 20 films, and some say it is potentially one of the most adapted pieces of literature and certainly the most well-known Christmas story outside of the Bible. This means that the plot is not only easy to fit into a 90-minute film, but also the skeleton of the thing, the main plot points of Bar Humbug, Ghost 1, Ghost 2, Ghost 3, Redemption, is so well fixed in the minds of even the child audience, it becomes much easier to spoof and alter. I talked about this in my essay on Hamlet and A Midsummer Night's Dream, which I will leave linked in the cards up above. In order for parody or subversion of a work to happen, an audience must be familiar with the original. The same is true for an adaptation. Whilst the adaptation must be able to stand alone for those unfamiliar with the original work, it must also bring something extra for those who are aware of what is being adapted. The warmth of recognition when one gets a reference. By adapting a source material so well known to most people, even who haven't read the novella, you are starting off on strong footing. But, as I said, there are many adaptations of A Christmas Carol, and all have the advantages of adapting a short, well-known original piece of work. So what about the Muppet Christmas Carol makes it the best? Well, it's the Muppets, obviously. This was the Muppets' first adaptation of a literary source material, though they would later go on to do many more, such as Muppets Treasure Island. But while later adaptations like that one would look more like Madcap Muppet Mayhem / musical revue shows very loosely based on a book, kind of like a panto, this first adaptation walks the line beautifully between zany Muppet Show and Dickensian adaptation. And I think a lot of that comes down to the casting. Brian Henson, the film's director, said they are recognisable Muppet characters first and familiar Dickensian characters second. Coming into this film, anyone with a knowledge of the Muppets will recognise and expect certain things from each character, whether that is the avuncular Kermit or Animal on the drums. In order for this film to work, we have to be able to suspend our understanding of the Muppets and see Kermit playing Bob Cratchit as different from normal Kermit. This isn't Muppets Do a Christmas Carol, but Kermit, Fozzie Bear and Miss Piggy as actors who seem to belong in this Victorian London. But the familiarity that we have with these characters as actors also allows a blending of the two worlds to happen. Kermit's character is not too far away from Bob Cratchit, and in Only One More Sleep Till Christmas, we see the lovable Muppet who always looks on the bright side of things. And the loving message of there's no such thing as a stranger when a stranger says hello is a philosophy that works for both Kermit and Bob Cratchit. When Kermit, Miss Piggy and Robin sing Bless Us All, we see a family. Both the Cratchit family and this well-known Muppet family, reflecting the love and faith associated with the Dickensian characters, and serving to make us feel the warmth of this scene. There are other wonderful Muppet castings as well, from the simple genius of making Fozzie Bear play Fezziwig and naming him the portmanteau Fozziewig, nice chuckle for those both familiar with the original and the Muppets, or the doubling of Marley's ghost to become Statler and Waldorf. This brings out an absurd humour that is common to both Muppets and to the original Dickens. Dickens was famous for his caricatures, his odd, eccentric characters that peopled the background of his stories. And so Muppets work equally well. I could see the Muppets producing a David Copperfield, just as perfectly cast as this Christmas Carol, because a Muppet could so easily play Mr. Dick. Marley comes to warn Scrooge in Dickens' original, but also to admonish him for the life that he's living. And the famous heckling from Statler and Waldorf serves to do both, with a combination of hilarity and spook, with "We're Marley and Marley, woo!" It also allows the joke of naming Jacob Marley's new brother Robert, so that we have introduced Bob Marley to Dickens. But as well as being funny, the casting is very carefully done. Yes, the film is peopled with colourful Muppets, but they are reserved for the more absurd scenes. Brian Rowe says, in Brian Henson's director's commentary, he talks about early concepts for the movie where the ghosts would be all played by familiar Muppet characters, Piggy, Scooter and Gonzo. But I think this would have made the film more akin to a Madcap Muppets rather than a more literary adaptation. By making the ghosts genuinely weird and spooky with new puppets, particularly with the Ghost of Christmas Past, instead of pushing into the realm of panto as many of the sitcom adaptations like Blackadder do, we keep some of the unsettling feeling of the novella. The Ghost of Christmas Past in particular tends to be problematic for filmmakers. Like a child, yet not so like an old man viewed through some supernatural medium which gave him the appearance of having receded from view and being diminished to a child's proportions. The Muppet's ghost is a small, child-sized figure with the voice of a young girl, filmed in soft focus, and the entire character is bathed in a bright jet of clear light. A fairy-like entity, ageless and magical, and matching the ethereal description of the original prose. In all of the Muppets movies, the Muppets play alongside human characters. And here, Scrooge, his family, and his love interest are all played by human actors.
Humbug.
It would be hard for scenes with Belle to have the same emotional impact if she was played by someone like Miss Piggy, for example, as love between a man and a Muppet is always comical. And casting Michael Caine to play Scrooge, in my opinion his best role of his career, the Jim Henson Company made a perfect choice. Michael Caine has famously said that he played this Scrooge as if he were playing the part for the Royal Shakespeare Company, and he does not hold back. His cold performance at the beginning, his gradual realisation of all he has lost, his fear and grief in the graveyard scene, and his childlike glee at the moment of his redemption are all powerfully performed. In one scene that was removed from the theatrical release for being too traumatically upsetting for children, Caine sings behind a flashback of his old sweetheart. And yes, some dreams come true, and yes, some dreams fall through. He stops here to sob in such an emotional manner that it was considered too upsetting for children. He so well embodies the role that no one else really feels right playing Scrooge. The real genius of this adaptation, it comes from a combination of a glorious piece of casting combined with a brilliant decision about the narrative voice. We talked in the beginning about how adaptation always has a perspective and is an interpretation, not a straightforward recitation of the original. But the Muppets managed to both draw attention to this work as an adaptation and simultaneously bring in the words of the original through the casting of Gonzo as Charles Dickens himself. Why I say that this is a genius bit of casting is because of Gonzo's role as a Muppet. Gonzo is an agent of chaos. Breaks things. More specifically, he often breaks down walls. And in casting him as our narrator, Charles Dickens, he spends the entire film breaking the fourth wall. Now, as I said earlier, a good adaptation does not have to be an adaptation that pedantically sticks to the plot of the original. But faithfulness doesn't make an adaptation bad, either. The Muppet Christmas Carol uses more of Dickens' words than any other adaptation, through the use of Gonzo as Charles Dickens. Many adaptations take dialogue from the book, "Bah humbug," and "There's more of gravy than of grave about you," are two very famous examples. But by incorporating a character of Dickens as the narrator, the Muppet Christmas Carol is able to incorporate prose as well as dialogue from the novella. Brian Henson said, "Nobody has ever captured Dickens' prose, the wonderful way he described the scenes. So we had to put Charles Dickens in the movie. We made him this omniscient storyteller, with Rizzo his pain-in-the-neck sidekick. 95% of what Gonzo says in the movie is directly taken from the book. The novella begins, Marley was dead to begin with. And with a slight alteration to allow for our two Marleys, the Muppets movie begins the same way. We also hear his descriptions of Scrooge. He was tight-fisted, hand at the grindstone Scrooge, a squeezing, welching, grasping, clutching, covetous old sinner. This is taken directly from Dickens, although Dickens added the word scraping as well. But the use of Dickens as a narrator adds more to the film than simply incorporating the source material's words. A Christmas Carol itself has a narrator who talks directly to you as a reader and makes silly jokes and goes on tangents. Old Marley was as dead as a doornail. Mind, I don't mean to say that I know, of my knowledge, what there is particularly dead about a doornail. I might have been inclined myself to regard a coffin nail as the deadest piece of ironmongery in the trade. But the wisdom of our ancestors is in the simile, and my unhallowed hands shall not disturb it, or the country's done for. You will therefore permit me to repeat emphatically that Marley was as dead as a doornail. This silly, absurdist humour is perfect for a Muppets adaptation. Gonzo achieves the same colloquial, conversational tone, talking both to us as the audience and to our stand-in, Rizzo the Rat. No other adaptation, whether played straight or parodied, manages to include the charm of that voice, filled with bizarre digressions and corny jokes. Light the lamp, not the rat is perfectly Dickensian.
Hey, light the lamp, not the rat, light the lamp, not the rat!
My apologies!
Put me out, put me out, put me out! Rizzo! What?
In fact, this adaptation is so Dickensian that there is a line at the end that is surprisingly not actually a Muppets original, but is in the book. Scrooge was better than his word. He did all and infinitely more. And to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father. That "who did not die" is so ridiculous that you'd think it was Gonzo interjecting, but no, Dickens wrote those words. And the "not" is even emphasised with italic. So, Gonzo uses Charles Dickens' words directly and acts the part of this invisible narrator from the books, giving us a tone and a narrative framing that are faithful to the Dickensian original. But he does this while all the time alluding to the fact that this is an adaptation.
You're not Charles Dickens.
I am too!
No, a blue furry Charles Dickens who hangs out with a rat.
Absolutely!
Charles Dickens was a 19th century novelist, a genius.
Rizzo, from the very beginning, calls attention to the fact that this is not Charles Dickens, this is Gonzo playing Charles Dickens. And whilst that is obvious to us all, it is rare in an adaptation, the fact that an actor is an actor, to be called out like that. We're never told that Michael Caine is playing Scrooge, it's just Scrooge. But not so with Gonzo. The fact that he makes us aware he's playing Charles Dickens also makes us aware that this is an adaptation, reminding us throughout that we are not just watching a film, but a film version of a book. Rizzo and Gonzo constantly spoof storytelling convention, saying Scrooge was forced to light the lamps, and then the lights come on and Rizzo says, "How does he do that?" And also saying that he's whispering for dramatic emphasis. When Gonzo describes what Scrooge is doing behind closed doors, and Rizzo wants to know how he could possibly know that, Gonzo says, "Storytellers are omniscient. I know everything. Not only does this film not talk down to the children for whom it's made, it is also adapting itself from a book that was about storytelling. In a way, the original Christmas Carol was an adaptation of the Victorian tradition of telling each other ghost stories at Christmas time. Gonzo is speaking the exact words of the text, but he is also viewing the story, and is so making fun of the techniques of the storytellers whilst also using those techniques to tell his story. It's very meta. As I said earlier, the time in which an adaptation is being produced is very important. Adapting a novella that is such a central part of the Christmas culture, due to the many, many adaptations that preceded this one, whether it's Bill Murray in Scrooged, or Scrooge the Musical with Albert Finney, or Mickey Mouse. So adapting a novella that is so central to the culture as that allows the Muppets to recognise the importance of this work as literature, whilst at the same time spoofing the genre of a literary adaptation film. And the self-seriousness of that. One of the key elements of parody is for the actors to understand that they are playing characters. And when Gonzo says at the end, if you liked this, you should read the book, he shows us he knows he was playing a character all along, and that this film is an adaptation of a book that exists. Gonzo exists in our world, a world where Charles Dickens existed. The film is not a separate world from us. And sticking close to the original, except for the fuzzy puppets, works well to do this parody. But the addition of a Charles Dickens, who knows he is not Charles Dickens, adds a whole nother layer to the self-aware fun. So that is why I think that The Muppets Christmas Carol is the best adaptation of all time, because it is spoofing adaptation in a friendly way. It does a very faithful adaptation of the book in terms of the actual storyline, in terms of using words from the book, and in terms of the tone, that creepy, spooky tone, particularly at the end, but also the fun, the humour, and the way that Charles Dickens tells the story with all of those diversions. Charles Dickens was self-consciously telling a story in the tradition of oral storytelling, and so having a narrator orally tell us a story adds to the sameness, making it feel the same as the book. And of course, Michael Caine gives a sterling performance, the costumes are beautiful, the sets are wonderful, and it has its heart in the right place. It is not purely mocking, but bringing us the heart of the original as well. So that is why I think this is the best adaptation of all time. Please let me know in the comments if you'd like to talk more about Adaptation Theory or any other adaptations you think are particularly strong. I would love to hear what you have to say. Thank you for watching this video. Please remember to give it a thumbs up if you liked it and to subscribe. I'm putting out videos every other day until the end of the year, so I will see you again very soon. Thank you for watching. Bye bye!